What is going on, guys? Monk7Mad here today with a highly requested tutorial, and as always it's of course going to be fantastic. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make my introduction. Since I've actually made it, I've actually started to improve my work with the way I've done it. I will be using After Effects for the entire project and two plugins. One is Element 3D version 1.5, and I'll also be using the Pro shaders that go along with it, so they're the materials. Now if you don't have those, it'll be very difficult to do this because a lot of people might have judged it from being in Cinema 4D. If you're interested in seeing something like that in Cinema 4D, I can try, but I cannot guarantee that it will look as good as this, but who knows. Anyway, so I'm going to show you how to make my introduction from start. To finish, this video might be quite long, so it might be one long video or two videos or maybe even three. We're going to start off by creating a new composition. Now the way that this actually works with my introduction is I actually made it in three different parts. I made the very beginning intro sequence where it flows across the front of the logo, then we've got the sort of moving back, and then we've got the text. So they're the three different stages. I'm only going to be showing you how to do one stage, because once you've learned how to do the one stage, you will easily be able to do the others. It's just the same stage repeated over and over again. In fact, it's actually less work than that. I'll point it out when we get there. So we're going to make a project and call this Phase 1 for the composition name. And I'm going to go with 30 frames per second. I'm using 1280 by 720, and I'm making the duration 4.15 seconds. Now, the reason I'm using that is because that is probably the most ideal time for me to display sort of close up on my logo, because generally I suggest that a logo introduction shouldn't take much more than between 8 to 10 seconds, otherwise it might seem a bit too long. And I don't know about you, but I don't particularly want to sit there watching sort of 15 intros before I get to actually watch whatever it is I'm interested in seeing. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to need to do several things to start off with. We're going to need to create two layers, two solids. So we're going to right click at the bottom down there, solid, make the color black, and we're going to click OK, make it the composition size, and click OK. Now you can either do that again, or you can press Ctrl D to duplicate the layer. Now we're going to also need to bring in the logo, or whatever it is we're going to be modeling. For this tutorial I'm actually going to use the phase logo. Now there's actually two ways of doing this next step, and that is dependent on whether your logo is either black or white. Because if we use the logo here, so if I drag it on, what we'll need to do is we actually need to mask it so that the software can recognize the actual shape itself, so we can actually import it into Element. So if it's a white logo, you can go to try and quickly attempt this, and that'll be Layer, Auto Trace. You can also do that with a black logo as well, but the difference would be this box here where it says the channel. If it's white, it will be Luminescence, and if it's a black logo, it would be Alpha. So depending on that, you can try that. Now for me, I actually think the edges you can see there are just a little bit squiffy, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually draw it using the pen tool, which I think is a lot more accurate, but it is also more time consuming. What I'll do is I'll pause the video and come back when I've masked the shape. Okay, so now I've masked it out. One thing I should have pointed out was you must make sure that when you're masking, you must choose the layer you're masking. So in this case it'd be the logo picture. Just thought I'd clarify that. Right, so the next stage... Oh, this chair is friggin' squeaky. Right, next stage we're going to do is we're going to go onto the black solid, and we're going to go Effect, Video Copilot, Element. And what it'll do is if we go on the Effects here, it'll bring up on the solid the Element control panel. So we're actually going to rename this layer so we know that this is the Element layer. And that's that, just so we make sure we can keep on top of things. Now in order to actually use any shape that you want, you will need to in fact create well, in fact we created the mask, so let me just save this quickly. Tutorial. Right, because we've masked out whatever shape, and this can be any shape in the world that you mask, you'll need to go to Custom Layers, Custom Text and Mask. So you can use text directly in After Effects and do the same thing. And you're going to go onto Path Layer 1 and choose where it says None. You're going to click on the drop down arrow and choose the layer which we masked. So in this case it'd be the phase logo. And then what we need to do is go onto the Scene Setup. Now what it'll do is it'll open up Elements Interface. Now at the moment you won't actually see anything, and you might think, well, it says here no model, so this is pretty pointless. Well, because we're only masking, because we're only on a mask at the moment, there's actually only a two-dimensional spline, so we need to actually click Extrude for it to make the actual shape appear. Now it's left click of the mouse and drag around to move the actual model itself, or you right click and that will move either lighting or environment, based on which is selected at the time. So we've got the phase logo here, and it's the roll the mouse wheel in to zoom in. Right, so we've got this, and we've got several options available to us. We've got the extrusion model options here, or we've got the bevel options here. So you can see where it's highlighted blue there or there. You get a different selection of options to choose from. So if I'm on the extrusion model, I can change the actual bevel scale itself. Just make the document a bit sort of thicker in depth. And we can also change a few other little bits and pieces. I'm only going to change that for the time being, and I'm going to go on to the bevel options, just modify the extrude to 1.15. Now depending on what logo you're using or whatever shape you're using, you might want to change these settings slightly so that it suits your project a little bit more. You can also, if your model's shape is quite close together, you can actually do something called expand edges, where the software will just sort of make the distance between the mask shape slightly further apart, so it's more likely to actually extrude clearer without things overlapping. You can also change, and this is probably one of the more important bits, is the actual bevel curve and the bevel depth. So sort of, not the bevel depth, sorry, it's the bevel size is the one I'm focusing more on. Like you can see the increase there. I'm going to use the default, I think I'll just leave it at 1, and I'll change the curve, which is how intense the actual bevel is itself, to about, let's go to about 0.8. Okay, so I'm happy with that, that's great. That's pretty much the modeling side of things done. We're going to just use the second half, which is the Pro Shaders, which I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to choose these. You can in fact create your own material by right-clicking a new material and then go through all the properties. But to save time, I'll just use a default, not default, I'll use a Pro Shader and drag it on. Now, with the Pro Shaders, or any material for that matter, you might notice that the texture might seem slightly blurry, and what you might want to check is that Draft Textures isn't selected. So you untick that, which will slow down the rendering of movement inside of the plugin, but it makes the project look cleaner, so you actually get a proper look at what it would look like in the final version. But you can leave the draft textures on. Also, if you click the environment option, you can actually see what the environment is like. If you right click, you can actually start to move the lighting, and you can see the environment itself likewise changing. It's not even the fact that it is changing, it's the fact that we're changing the actual location of where the lighting is coming in. We can also modify the actual environment by going up to the top here, where environment is, and clicking on it. We get a default blurred document. If we go on the drop down arrow, we've got plenty of things available to us. I'm actually going to choose Studio, and I'm going to click OK. I don't want to modify any of the properties there. And again, I can just sort of right click and maneuver the document around so that I can change the lighting. And apart from that, there is actually another lighting option available, and that's the default lights. You click on that and you've got other lighting options available, and that will change how the lighting can look. For example, we've got Aqua, which is a water-based one, and you can see how it gives it a bluish tint. And there's red ones and everything else. You can change it how you like. I think the red actually looks pretty good here, but I'm actually going to just well, I don't know, actually, I might give the red a go. I've not used the red before. This could be quite interesting. Now, when you actually click OK, But actually, before I go on to that, if you want to also change the texture, so if it's got, say, indentations in it, you can actually go onto the bump bit on the texture here, on the textures section. There's an area called the normal bump, and it's at 40%. If you increase it, it increases the depth at which it will indentate into the actual document. So I'm going to go to 70%. That's generally the number I seem to use. And I'm going to click OK. Now, I'm also going to now disable the visibility of the logo from earlier. Now, you might also notice now that the document is two-dimensionally flat, and if you try and move it, it moves the whole document. Well, what we actually need to do is we actually need to tell After Effects that, we want to be able to maneuver around this object, because it's in 3D space, but only with a two-dimensional camera. So we actually need to create a new, right-click, new camera, and make sure it's the 50mm, and you can leave the camera name as it is. You can use multiple cameras to create multiple different keyframes, so your different sort of phases, if you like, or you can just overwrite the same one. It's up to you. I think it's probably better if you do make more than one camera, but it doesn't matter. Then you can just give it a name, so camera, I'm going to call it camera effect, and we're going to go OK. And again, it's still not able to move, but if we actually now go up to the top here, or press the letter C on your keyboard, it'll go to something called the Unified Camera tool. And now if we go on the document, we can actually move the document around. Now, what you might wonder is, where have my sort of properties gone? What's happened to my red, light, etc.? Well, despite the fact that we actually edit it in Element, you actually need to still tell Element after that you want to include these effects. So we're going to go to the render settings, and we've got environment, lighting, fog. Let me just pause that a sec. Right, sorry about that. And we've got the depth of field, motion blur. We've got loads of different options available to us. Now, before I actually go in and solve that, if you've actually got, say, a model in several pieces, you might want to sort of start to model it differently via the particle replicator, so you can have more than one of the same actual document, and you can sort of separate them. I've forgotten how to do that now, but you can increase more than just the, there we go, you can increase more than just the one that's available to you, so you can have sort of some sort of spiraling effect or something like that. You can sort of mix the document up quite a bit via the replicator and look section. Now, to actually identify what group you're in, because there's quite a few groups, if you're back in the scene setup, we've got up here a blue number 1 highlighted, and that says it's in group 1. You can actually have it split across multiple groups. You can have it in group 1 and 2. In fact, you can have it in all of the groups at once, but you only want the specific group. Try not to put two objects on the same group though. Just sort of untick it by clicking on it and move it somewhere else. So we're in actually group 1, so we're going to go into group 1 if we wanted to modify those looks. Now, back to the actual render settings that I was talking about before. If we go to the environment, drop it down, we've got the show background. So we've got our background, and I don't know about you, I think that's actually, so set back to the default one again. Oh no, actually I think it has kept the studio lighting there, which is good. You can choose to show the background or not via the tick here, and you can also rotate the environment to change the lighting source. So you mostly probably want to change it via the y-axis, but you can also sort of muck around with all of the other options available to you. So we've got that, and that's the environment. I don't actually want to show it because I want to add in other effects myself, and that's the environment section done for me. Then the lighting section. This is probably the most important bit. You go to where it says add lighting, and you can choose from the selection of lights which we had before. So we've got red again, and we can sort of go into the rotation, and we can just sort of maneuver it so that we get our lighting sort of how it was before. I don't actually think it was too far apart from that. I think that's probably not too bad. I think that's pretty much the lighting it was before. So let's have a look. Yeah, I think that's okay. So for my case, this will be fine. And we've sorted that out. Now, if you actually wanted to create shadows, because the one thing about Element is that it doesn't actually create proper shadows. What we're going to do is we're actually going to zoom in. So if you want to zoom in, you right click and roll your mouse forward. Don't know how well you're going to be able to see this properly because the light is quite dark. But if you want to add in the sort of shadows, you'd use the ambient occlusion. You'd go on that, then you'd go on enable ambient occlusion. And at the moment I can't really see it here. See if I can get a lighting anywhere. Don't know, but we've got the intensity. You can very gently, if you look right in the angle point here, you can just about make out the intensity of it, and you can also change the radius. This would also make it more obvious. So if I remember rightly, I think my favorite settings for it were an intensity of about 4 and a radius of 0.8. I think that was quite a common one that I could use, as in like it sort of suited every sort of document I worked with, more or less. So that's sorted, and I'm not actually going to modify any of the others. For me, this is all I needed. It's a case of more or less sort of experimenting, I suppose. So now that we've actually got our scene moderately set up, we might need to add in additional things. So if we go over here, at the moment it's quite dark, so maybe we want to go and add a new light, and a new light will affect it would actually put the light in 3-dimensional space. I won't really try and explain it too much more than that, because that's literally all you'll be doing. So you can again name the lights if you like, and choose the light type to be parallel from the drop down list. And I'm going to use an intensity of 120%. I'm not going to cast any shadows because I've got ambient occlusion, and click OK. Now you can see that the scene is automatically brightened up here. Now don't forget, you can modify things like the focal point, so we're going to actually choose the selection tool via the V key if not. And when on light, if you don't want to select anything else, just lock all the other layers for the time being so you don't accidentally move anything. If we go on the light, we can actually modify the light focus. You can see the difference and how intense it gets. We only want a subtle one, so I'm going to go for about here. And we can also move the angles across, so we've got the X, Y and Z axis. To be fair, I actually think that's pretty much what I'm going to need. You don't want to go too over the top and make it sort of unrealistically bright, because we can still edit things via a color correction later on. So now that we've got this all set up, I'm just going to unlock the element layers again and leave the camera locked, and I'm going to put the only two layers I actually really need to work with now are the camera effect and the element layer. The camera is actually probably going to be used more than anything else from this stage forward, and this is like the sort of the main focus of the effect, is getting this bit right. So you want to find where maybe your starting point is, just so you can experiment for the time being. So maybe let's say I want to start it about here. I'm going to want to zoom in, and remember to focus on this you're going to need the unified camera. I think the light's actually a bit too intense, so I'm just going to quickly modify that again. If you drop down the options down here, you can change the light intensity. I'm going to go with 100% just for a slightly lighter usage. The great thing about this project is how you can constantly edit on the fly, which is a lot easier than going back to Cinema 4D, re-rendering and doing it again, which is why I prefer to do it this way round. So now that we've done that, we are going to need to get our camera options opened up. open up the, let me just make this a bit bigger so you can sort of see this a little bit clearer. If we go down here to the camera options, we've got several options available, and this is sort of where the magic happens. We've got zoom levels, depth of field, focus, aperture. These three here are the most important, and that's the depth of field, focus, and aperture. So we're going to make sure that the depth of field is switched on for starters, and you might see that the document automatically blurs. Now, that's great because we know that the depth of field is on, but how do we fix the blurring issue? Well, what we need to do is we actually need to play around with the focus distance, and this is exactly like if you were using a proper camera. When focusing on an item up close, you need to sort of make the focus distance closer, so a smaller number, and the further away you're focusing, the further away the distance. So I'm going to bring the focus distance in a bit, and you can see the closer I get in, see it's more blurred, it's getting here. So you've got to find the right distance. This is a medium distance, so you might actually be able to see while doing this a slightly, as in it's pixelated at the moment, right? But some sections you'll actually notice the pixels are a lot stronger, and that's showing you in like its own mini preview where the strength or the main focus is actually being displayed. So about there is right on the edge of the left-hand side, right here, which is exactly where I want to focus for the time being. But the problem is now it almost looks like the depth of field effect is completely useless for this half. And because we want to make the focus quite intense on this, we actually need to modify the aperture. So we're going to just turn the aperture up, and you can just sort of drag this up as high as you like for the time being, and you'll start to see the blurring effect take place. And as you can see here, this bit's a lot stronger, and this is blurred. And depending on how intense you want this effect to be, you can modify the aperture accordingly. So I'm actually going to leave it at 200, I think. For the time being, that's probably more than enough. And it's only a demonstration anyway, so that's fine. And we're actually going to need to start getting ready to keyframe all of our things in. So let's open up the transform options as well. Instead of actually moving the object, it's actually easier to move the camera, and that's how I've been working as well. It's also a lot easier to correct if something goes wrong, or you want to change something later on. So we've got in the transform option, this is the actual positioning of the camera, so how close the camera is. You could use the zoom option, but I actually find this is much easier to maneuver if you're actually trying to sort of make an animation across a surface or something like that. So we're going to want to keyframe the point of interest, although we won't really be modifying that. The position. If you wanted to, you could modify the rotations as well. I might leave that for a second and just see how I feel about it. I'm going to make sure that I keyframe focus distance, and I don't actually need to modify any of the others like the aperture because we've sort of set it up, because the main point of that is to get the sort of blur effect that we want. The rest of it will be handled via the focus distance. So we should only have about 3 items keyframed, so it looks actually a lot simpler than most people would probably imagine. But it's just trying to remember these stages in order to get it to work properly. So now this is sort of where it comes into your own court, so to speak, as in the ball's in your court, as to how you want to start styling your camera. You might want to focus directly on an edge here and move across. You might want to go straight from down this point up the camera. Up the surface. It's up to you. This is the part genuinely where it's now your choice. You just got to be able to understand that you want to make your starting point so you can't actually see the logo, or that's the way I would do it personally, because what we want is we want to make it almost mystical to the user. So if I just sort of bring this in and just sort of muck around with the positioning. I might go from about here downwards, I think. And then again, in a second, we're going to have to modify the focus distance because we're moving the camera. Actually, I think I will actually keyframe these 3 as well, just in case I want to keep the item straight, and that's the X, Y, and Z rotation. Yeah, that's the bit I wanted. The Z rotation mostly. Alright, so I'm going to zoom in. If you wanted to try and do it manually instead of dragging via the points, you can use the unified camera tool and manually rotate it, but you won't necessarily get it as accurate as you might like. Or maybe you might want to set the majority of it up and then edit the rest via the main property. So I'm going to set it about, I know you can probably see what this is, but I'm going to set it about here. And I'm actually going to turn the quality down a minute because I want to be able to edit slightly quicker. So I'm going to bring the focus distance in now, and you can see a sort of sharper line. If we actually watch, it's going from the far right in across here, look, so you might be able to see this sort of pattern of strength pixels. Now, right next to the red at the bottom, we've got this one really strong line of like a flesh coloured pink, and it's slightly moving closer towards us, and I think I've gone a bit too far there. Oh no, just keep going until you get to the point which you want. So some distances actually are only about a pixel or two apart, so you want to be quite careful when you do this that you get it right. If you're interested to know how it looks, you can always swap between the quality of half and full to actually get the sort of idea of how it looks in the final version and where the focus is. I'm actually going to just very minorly adjust it. Right, and you can also, if you wanted to ensure that the document isn't too blurred, and this is only if you want to, this is again more time consuming, but you can do it, is you can actually manually keyframe the aperture as well, so that maybe at the start there's so much more blur in the background, or maybe less blur, whatever you're sort of interested in. I might want to try and just get the focus on this point here, if I can. It's being a little bit of a pest. Do you know, I think for the purpose of today's tutorial, I think that'll do quite nicely. So I'm going to save my document, make sure I keep things backed up. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to move along the keyframe. I generally like to move about 2 seconds on the first one, just to give it a really sort of slow transition. The problem is, what you don't realise is in real life 2 seconds is actually pretty quick. And it's very easy to keep making the timeline longer and adding more to make it seem a bit longer, but you don't want to do that. So now this is the point where we actually just want to modify where the camera's focus is going to the next point. So I actually want to make it to go down here, along this point here. The focus distance actually isn't too bad at all. I'm going to manually rotate my Y rotation here. Oh, not my Y rotation. My rotation of the position, that's what I want. Sometimes you have to be very careful when you do this because you don't want to go too far overboard. Alright, and I'm now gonna just adjust the focus distance. Right. Just change again to the full just to see what it looks like. Yeah, that's pretty good. So the transition is just moving down the shape. And now I'm going to go back up on the other side. Now this time I'm only going to make it, instead of 2 seconds, I'm going to make it 1.5. So that's actually 1.15 away from 2, so that's 315. Because there's 30 frames per second at the moment. If you're using 24 frames a second, the halfway point would be 312. If you're using the same length as my video. And now again, just reanimate using your camera or however you want to do this. So I'm actually just gonna. Actually, I think the focus on this is pretty interesting. It's actually picked this point out quite nicely. So I'm actually just gonna leave that. I think that's gonna work quite nice. So now that we've got that all sorted, I'm actually just going to keyframe everything manually to make sure we've just got everything level to where we are. So just keyframe everything that we're using. Right, okay, and that's looking pretty good. I like that. That's going to work. Okay, so that's good. That's quite a lot of work done. So just going to resave it again, and this time what I'm going to do is I actually want to, because I'm pretty sure this generally happens when you're using a camera, it can look at points when it turns quite clunky. So to make sure that we got the smoothest transition from the first point to the last, I'm actually just going to highlight all of these keyframes, and I'm going to go on the graph here where it says graph editor, click on that, right, and you can see quite a bit of a mess actually. Right, so I'm just going to choose one at a time to work with here. So we've got position, and if I go on the position, you can see this is how it moves, and you can see it's very linear, as I was saying before. So we actually want to just sort of soften this up a little. So we're going to just choose the points. So just click on the point with your mouse and then hold shift and click on the next one and the next one. And is that it? Yep. Right. And now we're going to go to the bottom and click on where it says convert selected keyframes to auto bezier. And what you'll notice is it actually makes this look a lot more rounded. Now, what we've got to do is we've got to be able to use these little sort of sliders here to adjust the curve. And the smoother the curve is here, generally speaking, the smoother the transition should be. Remember that the side that the dot is pointing to, so in this case this side, it focuses on this bit, and this dot will focus on this section. So just sort it out a little, and we'll go on this one, and there. And you're just going to repeat this for any of the ones that you've got quite a lot of transitions on. The focus distance is actually the only one you don't really need to do. The only one you mostly have to do is position. But if you're doing rotations, then you should do it there as well. Okay, and now to get rid of the graph, we're going to go on the graph editor again and click on it. And you might notice some of the keyframes, the ones that are being smoothed, in particular the position, have got like an egg timer look now. So we know that the effect has sort of taken place. If I just quickly scroll through. Computer's getting a little bit overloaded here. Might help if I turn the quality down a little. Yep, that looks good. I like that. Okay, so that's the first phase done, and the next phase is actually to focus on the sort of the colouring corrections and other things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to unlock everything for a minute. I'm going to highlight everything in our document, and we're going to go to Layer, Pre-Compose, and name the new composition piece Finished Phase 1. And make sure that the Move All Attributes into a New Composition is highlighted, as well as the Open New Composition, and click OK. Now you'll notice that instead of working in Phase 1, the tab's actually now moved to Finished Phase 1. And everything's exactly the same. We can edit this. But now if we click on the Phase 1 tab, it's actually made it into a small movie clip for us. So there's no other effects going on. Now you might wonder how this will help, because what happens if you want to edit something? Well, all you do is you literally go back on Finished Phase 1, and if you've accidentally closed it off, you just double click on it and it'll open it up. And you can modify everything from in here, and it'll automatically and immediately update your current copy. So if I'm working here and I decide that the aperture is too much or too little, I can instantly go back into my Finished Phase 1, modify it there, and it'll automatically make the updated changes to this composition, which is extremely handy if you decide that you don't like something or you're questioning whether you like something or not. Okay, so now I'm going to go and make a new adjustment layer. Now, instead of opening something like Magic Bullet Lookup and editing it that way, I'm actually going to use some pre-made presets from some guy that's made them. I'll put a link to his channel in the description. He made some cinematic colors, some pretty nice ones actually. And all you do is you'll drag whatever one you decide onto your adjustment layer, or you can manually create your levels via hue and saturations, tints, curves, you name it. Now at the moment this is actually a bit too intense. The document is too dark and it's just too aggressive. And I don't mean aggressive as in it looks too tough, I mean as in it's just too difficult to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to press the letter T on the keyboard while selecting that adjustment layer, and it will bring up the option to change the opacity. Now I'm actually going to just change it down to about 35%, but you can sort of go through and edit it to find the number you want. Again, this is the sort of section where you decide how far you go. I actually think 50% here is pretty nice. If I just move along the document somewhere else, just to get an idea of what the colouring looks like. Yeah, I think this is looking pretty neat. I'm liking this. This is good. Okay, that's great. So just save it again, and I keep saving it because I'm always forgetting to, and I generally lose the work that I'm doing when that happens. Right, so that's that. Next of all, I want to, let's say I want to add in something like some stock footage, like some loose particle effects. This is the part to do it in. So I'm going to actually use some pre-made stock, and you can get these quite easily. And all you do is you'll drag it into your project and it will import it, or you could go to File and Import and choose your file or files depending on what you want. And this one is just, if I quickly preview it to you, just bear with it a second. It's just a very simple loose particle effect. You can also add in things like smoke or dust or both. I'm just going to drag this into the composition, and I'm going to put it below the color correction because I actually want everything to sort of fit in together quite nicely. And it's always best because if it's under the color correction, it'll all match color as well, or should match color, so to speak. Okay, so at the moment the particles have actually now overtaken our picture, so we need to right click on the layer, blending mode, and change it to screen. Alright, now you can see both the document and the particles. So I actually want to rotate this because there's too many particles on just this side, so I'm going to go up to the top here, get the rotation tool, and I'm going to just rotate this layer around, and I'm going to just sort of find a point where I'm happy with it. Alright, let's just move this along. And I'm just going to expand the document. What's going on here? Have I accidentally moved this? Yep, I have. I've accidentally moved the color correction. Alright. Just put that back. Probably a wise idea to actually lock any layer that you aren't rotating to avoid incidents like that. Alright. Okay, let's just quickly go over it, see where the particles are. Yeah, that's good, I like that. And now I'm just going to add in some smoke or some dust. So let's go and get that as well. I can always suggest that you look on YouTube for stock footage, because there's actually quite a few around and you can choose whatever one you want based on that. I'm going to go with dust elements. Generally I always use the same one, which is this one here, but what's this? I just want to see what this looks like. Alright, I'm going to use this one. It's called dust number 7. And I'm just going to put that on top of the particles. And the same thing again, right click, blending mode screen. And I'm actually going to move, because the dust particles actually kick up from the bottom, I'm actually going to, if I go to the beginning frame, you can see where it starts to kick from. I'm actually going to just drag this document either down off the screen, or I can stretch the document. I'm probably going to move down the screen to avoid it look like it's automatically just fluffing up on the screen. I want it to make it look like it's actually coming up from the background somewhere. So I'm going to go back, okay, and just go in the timeline a bit, just see what it looks like. And I'm also going to add a minor change to the opacity while I'm here. Same thing again, press the letter T if you want to change opacity. And I'm going to change this to 75%. And I'm also going to get a blur layer, because I just want this to be a little bit softer, because the whole document is focusing over here. I don't want it to be extra focus on anything else. So I'm going to get the camera lens blur and just drag it onto the dust layer which I'm working with, and I'm going to go on the blur radius, just have a look at it. I'm actually going to need to make sure that the camera is focused on full at the moment, so I get an idea of what it actually properly looks like. Alright, just bear with me a second while this all loads. I'm just going to turn this down to about 25. How's that look? I'm actually going to change it to 30. Might be a little bit too much in terms of blurring, but I'd rather it be like that for the time being. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can just check it over. I think this is looking pretty sweet, if I say so myself. And I'm going to save this again, and I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm going to highlight everything, turn it into a new composition, make sure everything's unlocked. So we're going to layer, pre-compose, name this one finished phase 2. Okay, and now we've moved to the phase 2, so we can close these off. And in the phase 1 section where we first started, it's now updated it to the finished phase 2 layer. And again, same thing, we can double click on that and then go back and edit anything in that stage as well as the first stage that we actually were working on. So this is actually now where we sort of just make the last tweaks. So I'm going to actually add a sharpen layer now. So I'm going to make a new adjustment layer and sharpen, and drag that onto the adjustment layer, and I'm going to change the sharpen amount. I'm going to go with about 15, I think, just to really bring out the depth and the sharpness in the edge where we're focusing. And I'm also going to now import some music. This is again your choice. To be honest, After Effects isn't the best one for trying to listen to music on the fly. So what I'd actually advise you do is you sort of play it or pre-render it and then play music in the background to the sort of same sort of time frame, or choose a bit in the song that you want and measure the time to try and keep yourself from constantly editing. You can listen to sound effects in After Effects, but you have to make sure that I'm going to turn this down for a second. You need to make sure that this is unchecked, so make sure that it doesn't mute the audio like this. You want to make sure it's unchecked, and you just want to pre-render it, and it will pre-render itself. I'll actually get a look at the dust here. Right. Alright, I'll just use this little bit here. Yep, that's fine. That's looking good. So I'm going to save this and I just want to, if you wanted to make any last minute color adjustments, this is the place to do it. Maybe you want to brighten the document up, you can do. If you want to, I don't know, add any other sort of effects, I suppose this is the point to do that as well. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. If we do import some music, I don't know which music I'm going to use. I will just pick up the first bit of music. Hans Zimmer, there you go. Can't ever go wrong with him and his amazing projects. Oh, this is from the Batman film. This will be interesting. I'll just pick a random point in the timeline as well. You could, if you wanted to save time constantly dragging it like what I'm doing, you could go to the composition settings, change the audio to the same length as the song. So let's say, I'll actually just change it to 2 minutes and 4 seconds so I can change it again after. Go up your timeline, find where you want. So, where are we? I probably took about a minute off. No, not a minute, I probably took about 16 seconds off before. So let's go to 2 minutes. That'll do. And what you could do is you could right click. Is it this way? No, sorry, you don't right click, you go to edit and then you go to split layer, or you press Control Shift and D. I'd imagine it's Command Shift and D for a Mac. Delete the layer that you don't want and just drag this down your timeline to the beginning point. If you wanted to create a fade in effect, open up your audio options, drop down that as well. You can have a look at the waveform if you wanted, just to see how it kicks in, and you would keyframe from the start point here and maybe have it at sort of -10 or something like that, and then go in your keyframe a few frames and just change it back to 0. And if you wanted to boost the sound, likewise, you just increase it. And the dB, in case anyone doesn't know, it's the decibels, which is the metric for measuring sound, the intensity of sound. So that is pretty much today's tutorial. I'll quickly render it and then I'll show you the final result. I'm already quite excited about this. I think it's looking pretty good. Really nice turnout. So output module, click on where it says looseless. Change the format to QuickTime. If you've added audio, enable the audio output, and you can change the audio type if you like. Make sure it's on stereo. That'll do. Okay. And because I'm using QuickTime, it changes the format to a .mov file. And I'm also going to change this name to the document. So I'm going to just call it tutorial element 3D and save it. Now, to make sure that you actually are working correctly with QuickTime, if you've never used it before, go on this again and just make sure that the format option for the video is MPEG-4, and if it's not, click on the format options, go on the video codecs, change it to MPEG-4 video, because it starts off by default via animation, and that takes a hell of a lot of space. I'm talking maybe 10 times more than an MPEG would for just a small file. And you can adjust the quality how you like. I'm just going to use 100 for the sake of it. Might as well have the best quality that I can. OK, and all you do then is hit render. Now, this document probably will take between sort of 4 to 7, maybe even 8 minutes. Now, I know I said it would take actually between sort of a few minutes. Well, I've actually just rendered it, and it's just taken 4 seconds. So, it's a 4-second recording render time for a 4-second video clip. So, that's actually going to be it, guys. I'm actually quite surprised how quickly that rendered. But that is it for today's tutorial, so I hope you did enjoy it. The video's been recorded about 8 to 10 times, and it's about an hour long, so it's taken quite a while, so I really do hope that you've enjoyed today's video. I hope that you have followed along. I just want to remind you though that this is only part of what would be a complete intro, because we've only done sort of the first sort of camera movement. But if you're interested in seeing another sort of tutorial like this, or you find the hour-long tutorials a lot more beneficial, then let me know in the comments section below. I will also put a link to the end, because I'm going to continue to work with this after to make a complete intro. So if you want to hit the outro at the end, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you have had an absolutely tremendous time and that you have enjoyed the video. I'll play it on the way out, so just get yourself ready for, well, 4 seconds of pure epicness. So thanks, guys. I'll see you later.